She was the most powerful and feared woman of her time. Her name was Theodora, and what began as a childhood nightmare filled with humiliation and exploitation became the making of the most dangerous empress in history. Her fate was sealed the moment her father, a humble bearkeeper working for the political factions of the Hippodrome, died. That loss pushed her into a world where abuse became her teacher and humiliation became her lesson. But how could the pain of an abandoned girl turn into the most sophisticated weapon of manipulation the ancient world had ever seen? Like a cruel performance, one despised even by the Romans themselves, her suffering shaped a woman who would one day unleash the massacre of 30,000 people and alter the destiny of the Byzantine Empire forever. This is the disturbing story of how the darkest sexual practices of Byzantium not only destroyed childhoods, but also forged a predator unlike any the empire had ever known. This is the story of a victim who learned to turn the poison of her own pain into power. A woman who transformed suffering into the fuel for domination, revenge, and an empire's legacy of blood that still echoes through time. It all began with the death of a man who, at first glance, seemed unimportant, but his loss unleashed a tragic chain of events that would doom his entire family. His name was Acacius, known in Constantinople as the Bearkeeper. His duty was to train the massive brown bears that fought in the Hippodrome arena before roaring crowds of 80,000 spectators. It wasn't a small role. In the rigid hierarchy of Byzantine society, every job was tied to one of the two great factions that ruled the city, the Blues and the Greens. These weren't just sports teams cheering chariot races. They were political machines that controlled jobs, favors, entertainment, and even positions within the empire's administration. Every citizen belonged to one of them, and that allegiance could decide the course of their entire life. Acacius belonged to the Greens, and through his position, his wife and 3 daughters had food, shelter, and protection, or so the rules promised. But when Acacius died suddenly, that fragile security collapsed. By custom, his job should have passed on to his family to ensure their survival. Instead, greed and corruption intervened. A powerful man named Asterius, the dance master of the Greens, who managed employment in the entertainment world, accepted a bribe. With one act of corruption, he gave Acacius's position to another man, condemning his widow and daughters to starvation, or worse, to the most organized system of child exploitation the ancient world had ever seen. Desperate to save her children, Theodora's mother faced an impossible choice: let them die of hunger or hand them over to a world that turned innocence into currency. She chose survival at an unimaginable cost. What followed was a scene of calculated humiliation. The mother dressed her 3 little girls in garlands of laurel, symbols of supplication and surrender, and led them into the center of the Hippodrome. There, before tens of thousands of spectators, she presented them as objects of pity. But everyone understood the truth. Those children were being offered to the dark machinery of Byzantine entertainment. The Greens, the very faction that had caused their ruin, turned away with cold indifference. But the Blues, their rivals, showed a trace of mercy and offered a small position to the new stepfather. In that moment, something eternal was carved into Theodora's memory: who had betrayed her and who had spared her. Years later, that memory would guide her vengeance with ruthless precision. By the age of 10, Theodora had already become part of a depraved system that stretched far beyond imagination. One of the most infamous performances she was forced to enact was called Leda and the Swan, inspired by a Greek myth, but twisted into something monstrous. Naked on stage, she was made to lie still, while trained geese pecked at seeds scattered across her skin, as a crowd of lustful men cheered and threw coins at her small, trembling body. It was a scene that any modern court would define as systematic child abuse. But in 6th century Byzantium, it was entertainment, sanctioned by law. According to Byzantine codes, every actress or performer in the Hippodrome was legally classified as a prostitute. Their physical submission wasn't just expected, it was required. A little girl who should have been learning to read and write was instead thrown into a world where her body was currency, and her innocence was the crowd's feast. But what set Theodora apart from the countless other victims wasn't luck, it was her mind. While others broke under the crushing weight of degradation, she watched, learned, and planned. Every act of cruelty became a lesson. Every humiliation, a rehearsal for the power she would one day seize. In the cruel stage of her early years, Theodora discovered that pain could become a weapon. That humiliation could reveal the hidden weaknesses of the men who inflicted it. Each show wasn't just degradation, It was a twisted classroom in human psychology. What should have destroyed her instead reshaped her into someone capable of turning exploitation into knowledge. By the age of 10, Theodora's life no longer resembled that of an ordinary child. While others learned letters and games, she was forced to perform night after night in the Hippodrome, reenacting the macabre play known as Leda and the Swan. Under the glow of torches and the gaze of thousands, she lay naked on the sand while trained geese pecked barley grains scattered across her skin. The crowd, senators, merchants, and citizens hungry for perversion, roared with applause and hurled coins at her fragile body. For them, it was entertainment, a blend of cruelty and lust. For Theodora, it was the beginning of a brutal education. She soon learned that the show was only the beginning. After the applause faded, the true horror began. In the corridors beneath the arena, where those same men demanded her submission, Byzantine law was merciless. Any woman who performed on stage was automatically branded a prostitute. Abuse was not just expected, it was legalized, but Theodora refused to be destroyed. She began to observe, to learn. Every insult, every act of violence became a lesson. She watched the powerful, men who ruled during the day, crawl like pathetic creatures in the dark. She studied their gestures, their words, their silences. The Hippodrome became her university, and she its most brilliant student. By 16, Theodora was no longer a child, but a woman forged in fire. She had turned pain into power, submission into strategy. Men paid fortunes for her company, believing they owned her, never realizing that she was studying them, preparing to one day dominate the very world that had enslaved her. Then came the governor of Libya, Abylis, one of the empire's richest men. Enchanted by her, he offered to make her his personal concubine. For Theodora, it seemed a chance to escape the nightmare. For 4 years, she lived in luxury, surrounded by marble, silk, and gold. But she never forgot her lessons. Every night, she examined Abylis, his fears, his desires, his weaknesses. Even the man who commanded provinces could be reduced to a trembling figure when stripped of his illusions of control. He thought he possessed her. In truth, he was feeding her ambition. When Theodora began to influence his political decisions, his pride turned to rage. One night, he cast her out, throwing her belongings into the desert and leaving her to die beneath the burning Libyan sun. Yet once again she survived. That betrayal became her final lesson. Never depend on the power of a man. Real power must be built with one's own hands. To return to Constantinople, Theodora sold her body aboard merchant ships crossing the Mediterranean. But now, she was no victim. She traded not only flesh, but information, extracting secrets, routes, and deals from every man who thought he owned her. Each encounter became a transaction of power. By the time she reached Alexandria, she was no longer the broken child of the Hippodrome. She was a woman reborn, dangerous, calculating, and ready to rise from the ashes of her past to challenge the empire that had once condemned her. After her exile, Theodora wandered through the deserts of Syria, stripped of everything but her will to survive. Among the monophysite Christians, persecuted believers who saw one divine nature in Christ, she found something new: purpose. Their silent strength mirrored her own rebirth. When she returned to Constantinople, she was no longer the girl who danced for coins in the Hippodrome. She had become a woman forged by pain and sharpened by faith. Justinian, the ambitious heir to the throne, saw in her not disgrace, but destiny. Against all tradition, he married her, lifting a former courtesan to the height of power. As Empress, Theodora ruled with iron and fire. She reformed laws, protected women, and guided the empire beside her husband with unmatched intelligence. During the Nika riots, when the city burned and Justinian planned to flee, it was she who declared, "Royalty is a fine burial shroud." Her defiance saved the empire, but her strength made her enemies. She faced whispers, betrayal, and the shadow of her past until death claimed her at 48. Yet even in death, Theodora's legend endured. A woman who turned humiliation into power and carved her name into the marble of history.